Khoa is a 10-year academic who works now with us at HASSELL as provocateur and challenger. And he also has various academic awards, and he won National Teaching Award, so he's very much involved in teaching and education part. And he will run this meeting, and hope you take over from there. Thank you.
You're excited about introducing me?
Yes.
First panel went really well, very energetic. I hope that the energy sort of continues to flow. I've been misunderstood. A lot of people have asked me where that came from. That actually I have to credit my wife for that. I was explaining to her how BIM is kind of confusing, and so on and so on. There's different meanings behind it. It's been misunderstood. Lovely. Use that. So I have to credit her. So before we kind of dive into this next section of the discussion about BIM, I'm passionate about education, and I think so. This morning was about, I guess, the academic world offering up environments of learning and best practices for adopting and transferring BIM through education. This panel seeks to look at the quality of design, and at the end of the day, I think these tools and mechanisms are about enabling good design and good ways of providing good design, and that is communication and I guess delivery. So I'd like to firstly introduce our member panels. Panel members. Start with Craig Muir down this end. Craig is a principal architect from WA at GHD. Next to him is Greg Salter, director at Cameron, Chisholm and Nicol. And next to Greg is Alex Quinn, an associate director of Gresley architects and urban designers. Next to Alex is Mitchell Allen, Senior Associate at HASSELL. It's terrible I got your name wrong, you sit next to me. And at the very end, but last but not least, Fergus Holmen. From Group Design Technologies Manager at Woods Bagot. So welcome, panel. I'd like to maybe kickstart the conversation with Greg Salter, actually. If you could maybe start us off up with the discussion.
All right. Just as a bit of background, I've been a director at CCN for about 20 years and started off manual drawing through Wake before it was Curtin Uni, and then the advent of CAD, and then through the advent now of Revit and into BIM technology. So I've had a fair bit to do with managing that process through what we call a large state-based company. We're not a national company like HASSELL, but we're still faced with a lot of the same issues that come about. And just to summarise, I guess, what we're talking about today, Ali kindly gave the panel a few keywords like design process, collaboration, communication, practice risk, organisation, valuating and education. And you could talk for an hour on any one of those, but my aim is just to give an overview of where I see it from practice and then throw it open for discussion. And I think the key part of this, the question we're posed is how can we teach BIM to make design better? And I would really turn that around to say how can we design with the tools we've got today? And I just call Revit and BIM another tool. It's a little bit different, and one of the key things with students coming out nowadays is we're in the old apprenticeships. The carpenter would have his own chisel and his own hammer and bring them along. The students that are coming out today don't own the software and don't have the capability to own and bring that with them. They're really dictated in how they come out of the universities and what the main practices are using, and they've got to adapt to those. And at CCN we predominantly use Revit. We start off every project in Revit, and we encourage the design aspect of that to shine through. I think a lot of students make the mistake of getting involved too much in the detail because you can draw lines and because you can draw sinks and basins and putting those things on early and they become too fixed. And what we try and do is to make them step back and take the blinkers off and look at the old approaches of site analysis, design response, and getting the key things right. You know, where's the solar orientation, where's the sun coming from, not just putting a balcony here because it best fits my plan at the time or it fits a standard layout. And once we've got those things in place, the most important thing to me is what Bill Smart call IPD, or integrated project delivery. That they've got to be collaborative from the start and learn to work in a collaborative environment. And good design comes out of now using the tools correctly and working collaboratively. It's no good us as architects trying to design something, and I'm learning this even in these sessions I've had today, what the QS has to offer, what the builder has to offer. The whole process that we're still working through today has been set up by a process that started when we were still drawing with rotary pens. We're tendering on the basis of lowest tenderer gets the job, and the builder comes in on board usually after the design has been done, and there's not that much contractor involvement. We've got to get the best out of the design process, we've got to really unwind a lot of the processes that have been integrated into the profession at the moment, both in the way the major firms work and the way the teaching is done, and start to look at the best end value. If we're going to design a model in BIM up front, what are the parameters, what are the scope, how's that model going to be used? Is it just going to be used for the design process? Is it going to be used in a 4 and 5D sense for the build and construction process? Is it going to be used in an asset management process? Is the QS going to use it to take off quantities? Are we going to use it for any number of other reasons? And when we set those parameters at the start, we've really got the focus of a brief. And a lot of those things when we brief design at the moment aren't taken into account. So my major issue here in just introducing this thing and introducing the discussion is to say, let's not look at isolation, which was drawing and putting it out. Let's not even look at collaboration, which we do now, and draw a model and design a model and then give it out to consultants and get feedback. But let's look at a fully integrated process, which is the third step in BIM and what truly makes BIM work. Take it back to the initial stages, get the scope right, set the fees for that scope and what work has to be done up front right, and give the people the training and education they need to deliver that design. So that's the introduction.
Anyone from the floor would like to carry that on or punctuate it a little bit? No? Alex?
Someone said, I think it was yesterday at this briefing, there's a cartoon about, it was showing 3D models, and then it had these amazing 3D models, and then one of them was just this, rectangular sort of hip roof house, and it said, the director wanted to put his design in there as well, because that whole basis of it used to be, rotary pens and pencils, and you're only as good as your vocabulary. Your ideas are only as good as your vocabulary, and then it was your vocabulary of penmanship or penwomanship, and now that's changed. We're still the buck stops with us as designers and documenters to be able to know a vocabulary to put our design forward, and as we get into something that's digital, that's able to be shared and collaborated with, we still are required to learn that craft to be able to show our ideas. Without that language, we don't have ideas, and I think that's obviously a big hurdle in such a sort of time of transition. That's.
I want to go to Craig, because I think he started BIM very early, using Eagle, and did his dissertation on it. So, go ahead, Craig, can you...
So I too started at Weight, which then turned into Curtin, and in my final year, the school lashed out and bought Eagle, which was a full object-based system at that time, back in the 80s. We went from drawing with T-squares or drafting machines, and in that year we embraced, or a few of us embraced, 3D modelling. I then went on to work at the BMA as they were adopting AutoCAD on a couple of their projects, and then went overseas and worked with, for those who remember, T-squared and some of the applications of the 80s and early 90s before moving to ArchiCAD, and then architectural desktop, and now we work in Revit. So over that time I've seen a number of systems or tools evolve. And I think, coming back to Greg's comment, the quality of the design is around the thought that goes into it. The best software in the world isn't going to design a good building for you, but at the same time you must make the most of the tools that they exist at any point in time. And certainly over the last 25 years, the way those high-end systems have developed, and the kind of projects we were using back in the late 80s, early 90s in London, we were using Cillian graphics workstations back then, which were £25,000 machines, to do pretty much what Revit 2008 did on a desktop. So as it's become more affordable and more widespread, it's enabled the profession to move into a space that wasn't there 10 years ago. And I think that cultural change is the thing that we are grappling with as a practice. And I have a left and a right brain in this discussion, because I'm the principal architect at GHD, and for those that don't know, GHD is a integrated architectural and engineering practice, and I'm responsible for our property and buildings practice. So I have an architectural side and an engineering side on the left hand. So that collaboration within our practice is quite a focus, because how the architects, the interior designers, the landscape architects work with our engineering teams is of primary importance to us, because these systems throw the teams together in a different way. And what I've seen over the last probably 3 or 4 years is, I think the architects have collaborated pretty much always. The engineers, in some cases, were dragged kicking and screaming into that environment. Those that have got it are really embracing it, and I think that's one of the shifts I'm seeing across the industry now, that the other disciplines are now really getting on board and seeing the benefit. I think the reason why the architects were the leaders, traditionally were the lead consultant, and that we were more inclined to take the opportunities that were there, because it gave us some design freedoms and opportunities through the advent of various 3D visualisation systems that are now morphed into obviously object-based and very intelligent systems. So I think it's an exciting time. It's a matter of making the most of those tools, not letting the tools run away with the project or the designer. And I think that's something that, as Greg said, you see that with people going, well, I know how to run the software, surely I must be okay, and that doesn't necessarily lead to a good outcome.
Fergus, how do we get it, mate?
How do we get it? Look,
Technology manager.
I think that, as was discussed briefly in a session this morning, that the industry has a challenge at the moment, that some of the traditional silos between firms, between disciplines, are starting to shift. They're starting to erode. Also within firms, some of the traditional roles that existed, and I think engineering is probably a good example, that going back 10 years, the role of the engineer who worked with an A4 piece of paper and a pencil, and that was about it. And the people that actually did the drawing work, that's kind of a model which disinhibits BIM. I think that really getting those boundaries to break down is probably the best start, and that goes back to some points this morning that were raised about cross-mentoring, that we need to accept that there are different skill sets that exist. To bridge the gap means working from both ends, both sides of the equation at once.
Mitch, you're at the pointy end of things. What's your...
I've thought about, often how do you improve the effectiveness of the sort of integration, and I think that's critical. And I think traditionally, I suppose you could say that the architect that's been their responsibility in delivering a building. To integrate fully all the disciplines that are brought together to make a building. But I suppose we're at a point now where we need to dismantle that process again and go back to the start and work out how do we use the technology to inform better integration. How do you do that? I don't know how you do it within the sort of contractual or commercial arrangements that are in place. I suppose that's one question that needs to be answered by the industry collectively.
I think just leading off that in terms of the engineering input, is that the architectural documentation, interiors documentation, is so linked now to the MEP side of things that you're relying on that PowerPoint to be in that spot on that wall in your room elevation, and if the MEP guys don't take responsibility and are accountable for that, it leads to major issues for the architectural team in the past. We would have probably drawn the PowerPoint, controlled it, and understood that it's there, and it didn't rely on the engineers. And I think that's part of the cultural shift we're going through, and making sure that that shared content when we're in a BIM environment becomes a very different thing to manage. Traditionally, we wouldn't have to worry about those things, but as we get the benefits of a fully integrated BIM model, naturally you need all parties to be contributing in a similar fashion. Otherwise, very quickly, one's left out hanging. I think
it goes from sort of, there's 3 PowerPoints, meaning 1 PowerPoint, but now there's only 1 PowerPoint, and that's, I think, a critical one where everyone's working on the same thing. I mean, we've just, Bowman Bureau documented, Candice and Sean up there, and Kim, they've just documented, externally documented a project that we're doing that's soon to be sort of under construction, and we've just done 2 very small projects that are just going out to tender, so we're very, very new to it. But one thing that's, I suppose, really consistent across all architects is that that collaboration, and traditionally our job's been that you attempt to convince the client that you need all of the consultants engaged before any design's been done, and you get everyone around a table and you coordinate that kind of meeting, that process, and get everyone just to get everything on the table, just however silly it seems or however complex it is, just get it all on the table. And then it's traditionally been the job of the architect to sort through all of that and mould it into something that satisfies as many possible sort of aspects of it as possible. And so taking that to the next level, I think I'd want to sort of know where we're going to end up, where BIM's going to take us. Are we all, that first meeting, are we all going to be walking around with goggles on and assembling things and pushing things around and saying, no, my duck's got to go through there, piss off, and sort of, are we going to be doing it to that point where then the architect doesn't really sort of sort out in isolation all the things that have been collaboratively put on the table, but then starts to sort of orchestrate lots of people, like I suppose a conductor, as someone that's leading an orchestra of people with very different talents and very different things, and all of those clashes become apparent. Are we going to end up there eventually? Is that where the end point is? That collaborative and that kind of that point.
Just
You put your hand up. There's
wait
always
a
one.
second. I put my
Sorry, Mark. You go.
just your last words. Something came to my mind is Europe Middle Ages. I was an architect. There was master builder, and he mucked up. He was in trouble, and he was responsible for everything.
Mm.
And we went through a whole time of specialization. And we have now specialists for curtain walls. We have specialists for systems. I don't know what we have specialists for. And my feeling is we again on a new turning point where again generalists are needed, because you need a generalist who knows a little bit of everything.
Mm.
And in the 70s we went from generalists into very specified areas, and now I think it's positive, but I think we move again to a type of person that needs to be able to maybe know not everything about all these parts, but at least knows how to integrate it and what everybody needs in that. And I think that's a new job, and maybe a job that used to be there in the old ages, but comes back as a renaissance again.
Yeah, well, it really is the role. That's why project managers have taken so much away from architects, because they're process driven. But I think there's a very good analogy. There was a question asked this morning about what is an expert in BIM, and I like to use the model of a cross, and right in the middle is the project. The horizontal integration is just the collaboration of the different consultants that are working on that process to bring the building into shape, and it really comes back to the definition as what is a project and what is design. So in that one sense, and horizontally, you're designing the project and the project is a building. To take the vertical axis, on one side there's the end of life, which is the asset management that's going down and what life that has and how that's developed. But equally to me, the side that's going up is very important too, because a building is only an object in a place and in a time. So there's a bigger element of design in coordination, of spatial coordination, the GIS system. Like for example, the City of Perth is doing its own mapping of all the buildings in Perth at the moment. When you put a DA in, you've got to put a three-dimensional model that'll fit into their model. But they can equally, if it's coded correctly, get information on what the plot ratio of that building is, how the plot ratio utilisation is, or what the density under the R codes. So they can build up demand analysis on a city-based design model as well. So there is not just the horizontal integration of using BIM to design a building, but there is the vertical side of how that information is used and how it can go into the bigger picture. And you're not going to have an expert in BIM in any one area in that. You're going to have a person that can manage and understand that whole process of design and how best to set it up in the first instance, how to set it up with authorities, how to set it up with consultants, how to set it up with owners, how to set it up with builders, who all play a part in bringing this together. And I'm sure in 20 and 30 years' time, we're going to have those systems in place, but we've got to work towards them now.
Good point. I was going to say, what I come away from is that BIM is not a silo. It's actually a business process, and that going back to generalisation, yes, you've got to have someone who understands that whole generalised process. But I think there is actually now sort of becoming a case for someone who's actually specialised in the end of life, the asset management side of it, and the facility management side, as well as the 4D and the 5D uses of it. So, I mean, I think another role for architects to be involved in that process, and to maybe not control the process, but certainly the generalisation's got to be there as well as extra specialists.
Can I ask just as a question of how do you feel, or to the panel, how do you feel owners of these assets are taking this approach of BIM? Do you feel you're finding more clients that are coming to you and understanding what BIM means and what they really get out of the whole philosophy behind it? Or are they still really stuck in going, I have no idea, and what are we really going to get? Are we just paying extra fees for whatever? How do you guys feel about that?
I would say from my experience, I think there is a difference between what clients understand and what their lawyers understand.
Yeah.
That gap at the moment, suffering from the tendency to cut and paste the previous contract that you had. I haven't seen a contract for a while that's mentioned AutoCAD 14, but for up until the last 2 to 3 years, it was still pretty common. But certainly within this region, virtually every region that we operate in, I'm seeing far greater understanding of the possibilities, even if those possibilities aren't well defined. I think there is a distinct gap at the moment in terms of the sort of facilities management, whole of life use being a hazy, ill-defined thing. People can see the possibilities, but it's pretty rare to find an organisation that will talk to you about exactly what they're going to do with it, be able to define that to any great extent.
But I'm still wondering, your clients come to you and ask for a project to be done. Are they actually asking? Are they still asking a traditional, or they have no idea yet?
No, they don't have. We've got a lot of multinationals, even the government. Carolyn, it wasn't her, but we had a brief recently come out from the government and said the project had to be done in BIM. So we rang them up and said, what do you mean by it's got to be done in BIM? And they said, BIM. What they really wanted was that it had to be done in CAD, and they wanted the CAD drawings afterwards. They didn't. I know there's a lot of work being done in defence, and we've got defence contracts out now, and there's a lot of very good work being done by governments and universities, and the push by 2016 to really define and get projects out in Revit. But there is a big misunderstanding about what BIM's there. A lot of people have got a lot of different ideas about it. We've got a lot of major multinational national clients that do repeat business with the likes of Australand, and multi-residential project after project. They really don't brief us as to how we do it and what we do it and what they want them. If we do it in a model and show them a couple of pictures, great. That's Revit 3D. Well, that could be done 20 years ago. We can tell them that we can put a pump in the basement and we can make it turn green when its service is due. So what does that really mean? How much is that going to cost them? Is the asset manager going to be able to take that on board and use it? And when they install it onto their asset management computer, how are they going to be able to run BIM and who's going to be able to do it in their organisation? There are just so many questions about how the client will brief us and how will they, even if they ask for it, how they'll actually use that information. That 99% of clients at the end of the day are interested in the hard form and how quickly they can sell the units or how much lease they can get for the building, and well and good if it's got a 5-star NABERS rating, that might help me get a better lease. But that's what they're interested in, the dollars at the end of the line. They're not interested in the process or the tools we use to drive it at this point in time.
Can I ask, how do we educate these owners to understand their value of your designs, and how do we better educate them? Have anyone got
Look, I think the challenge at the moment is there are multiple platforms for asset management. A few of those now talk to BIM models, and we're involved with one of those trials at the moment. The challenge is that traditionally the facility management brethren are all those that weren't really exposed to this level of CAD and BIM in their youth. And if you look around a lot of the facilities managers, a lot of those are nearing their retirement age. So I think we're going to go through a transition over the next 10 to 15 years in that space. And historically, the asset management systems at one level were quite sophisticated, and others they're really not in the way that they manage information and data, particularly that's produced by a design team. So I think until some of the platforms improve, and there are a number of out there, there's Maximo, there's FM Systems, there's a range of them there that will actually now integrate a BIM model, and you can pull out asset registers and you can do moves and you can do maintenance and all those things. But it comes having an educated client that has the resources in-house or are prepared to have support from a consultant to implement that process. And we're seeing that now on children's. Once children's is handed over, there will be a fully integrated asset management system using the Revit models primarily to drive ongoing asset management and maintenance. So it's happening, but there's really a few flagship examples. And even in the work we've been doing for PTA on CityLink, the BIM component there has been more around construction. However, it's giving them much better information for their as-builts and ongoing management, but it's not hardwired into their asset management systems yet. So I think we're still in a transitory stage in terms of just where the technology is and the cost of it as well. That's the other aspect, that a lot of these systems that are quite weighty from a cost point of view. So again, from an asset management point of view, you want to make sure you're picking the right platform that's going to be around in 5 years' time and it will still do the things you want it to do. So I think that's probably the dilemma we've got at the moment.
Thanks, Greg.
On a different, because in the design process involved, do you think BIM or BIM softwares help you make better buildings, or you think you made pretty good buildings before and they're not really getting any better? As an architect, do you think it helps you as an architect? Forget about everybody else. Does it help you?
Initial comment to that would be, does it help make you build better buildings? I don't necessarily think that is the case, but I would suggest that it helps you communicate those buildings and helps other people understand those buildings through the design and construction process. And does that therefore mean that you've got a better building at the end of it? I'm not sure that we're probably there yet necessarily, but I certainly think that, it aids the process. Does it aid the result? Does it give you a better result at the end?
I think there's a few aspects to it. I mean, if you think, architecture as, as space and, and light and, this, uplifting great result of, voluminous cathedral or, all of those things, then I don't think, whether it's a hand drawing or what medium it's drawn in, I don't think that really aids a better result. But if you think of the sophistication which building methods are coming along and sophistication of modelling and, the the pursuit of sustainability and all of those aspects where I know a lot of, say, artists use 3D, because of the manufacturing. I mean, the manufacturing industry is way, in front of us. I mean, people were doing 3D structural shop detailing. They've been doing that for much longer. Things like that. I think that's helping it to get a better building, as far as if you're taking the design aspects of, say, thermal performance and and facade systems and speed of construction systems and prefabrication and all of those type of things. I believe that the 3D modelling then allows us to get a better building, which all depends on this massive animal called design and architecture. But I think those aspects allow us to get a better building.
The measure of better buildings is in perspective of what you need. Caroline, Lara, and our cameraman. He's getting into the action. Turn the camera around with you. Sorry, Caroline.
I just wanted to ask, from a procurement point of view, it seems that integrated project development is going to get the best results out of BIM. And, to actually get all those plans, including subcontractors, so not only sub-consultants involved in the design, because we've had a few projects that we've trialled BIM on, and it seems that perhaps the right detail and the right expertise isn't getting into the project early enough. So certainly the traditional procurement methods don't really suit. But at the same time, I think if we go to a complete IPD or design, build, manage, if we start looking at different procurement methods, which will enhance that sort of collaboration, then we see perhaps a diminished role for the architect. So I'd just like to think what the panel think about that.
Who wants that curly one?
I'll answer that. I think our experience, we work across, as GHC, work across the buildings area, we work in transport and actually energy and resources as a consultancy. And some of our best successes are in alliance mode, and those projects which have had a heavy dose of BIM methodology applied to it, in an alliance mode is easier to deal with because everybody's heading in the same direction in a contractual framework that is more conducive to collaboration. And it's more like the US model of partnership, where when we're backing out the more traditional procurement modes where you've got more adversarial relations right through the supply chain, that's more challenging. It's absolutely more challenging. So how you apply alliance principles to smaller buildings projects, I don't quite have the answer for, but that's certainly in our experience, it makes a significant difference as to people are prepared to invest and work together to get the best outcome. When you've got a target cost in mind and everybody's incentivised around that, be it the designer, the client, the head contractor and their subcontractors, it makes quite a difference. It doesn't make it perfect, but it helps head you in the right direction.
And that's got to be an inevitable place where we're going to be, where we have, got to deliver it with these outcomes, whether that's cost or or whatever criteria, and that you've got to take it from brief through to PC, and then hand it over to the client, and that client is there just for for briefing and as a typical client's role. And I think bringing into another person into the mix, say the contractor or the subcontractors and things, that instead of diminishing the role of the architect as coordinating that, I think it increases their role in that sense, because there's another part of information in there that's got to be sort of processed and things. And I think and if it's, I apologise if there's any project managers in the room, but I suppose the project manager, if an architect's doing their job well and coordinating that consultant team really well, makes the job of the project manager much easier. And the project manager's role is to sort of manage that, or to pretty much report and manage that process from a quite a large scale out. And it's the architect's role to make sure that actual information gets processed and integrated into whatever format we're using, and so that building contains all of that. And so I think just adding more people into the mix and more collaborative atmosphere, I think the role of the architect is evolving sort of into that and is becoming a lot more.
We're talking about world peace here, mate.
It's very important stuff, Khoa.
Very reassuring.
Going back onto Caroline's question though, I think design and construct goes a little bit of a way towards that, because in the first meetings we have, unfortunately with design and construct, the builder's probably the lead consultant or the leader of that type of procurement process, but it is a situation where the subcontractors and the designers and the consultants are all in the room day one and trying to work to the same objectives, because he's put his nuts on the line, if you like to call it that, to be able to deliver to the client a full design and construct process. But from what I know in the Western Australian industry at the moment, that builders aren't particularly keen to lead a BIM process, or aren't even, I don't know about if you understand me, but a lot of the projects are still, you do it your way and just give us what we want. They're not led by a particular process under design and construct, which is put in place by the person that's running that.
And I think the other aspect of that is that typically the contractors want to spend the least amount of consulting dollar in that upfront stage. So our experience is very difficult to get a contractor to pay what's required to the consultant team to actually deliver a considered BIM process.
So it's collaborative, but it's not BIM.
Yeah, that's right. And also from their point of view, they their dollars at risk. So they, the other thing is they tend to also minimise their own team's involvement. The design team gets enormous value by sitting down with their construction managers during the design process and saying, "Oh, we like that approach, not that structure system," and whatever that may entail. And even that they'll tend to be careful about how much time they give of their own people. So, I think that's the challenge with D&C, that it is, that early contractor involvement and having the contractor in there with the design team as a minimum is a great start. But it comes back to the commercial reality of, will they actually pay enough to make that worthwhile? And our experiences are that, that I haven't seen a BIM delivery on a D&C yet, especially in the upfront stages, prepared to invest enough to make that happen.
And if we are doing this, if we are doing this to get better buildings and and better outcomes, then it's all fees. Everyone complains about fees, but do the fees, because it's such a longer use of BIM, that the fees are commensurate to that, and over the fee structuring one for where the bulk of the work's done is sort of going to have to change to be more parallel to this process. And also maybe the fees do have to be higher. Maybe you do have to pay the consultants more and things like that, because of what usefulness you're getting out of the information that is coming out of the process. Maybe it is worth that. But I don't know how we convince people of doing that.
Lara.
So my question kind of relates to kind of this discussion, and Alec, you were saying that BIM supports perhaps doing better design, and Khoa, you started this session saying this is about BIM and good design. So my question is, what is good design? How do we define good design? What I'm hearing, what I've heard today is that I think that as our role as an architect's role in the profession is starting to shift, I think the way in which we define good design is starting to shift. You've all referred to good design in different kinds of ways: the experience of space, the thermal performance, value, whatever value might mean, and all those sorts of things. So I'm interested to hear about what good design is, because from my point of view, with an interest in sustainability, this sounds very similar to the discussions in sustainable design that were being had 10, 15 years ago, and yes, there was a lot of background, and now all of a sudden we've just kind of got over that.
So we're still talking about it.
We're still talking about it, but there seems to be a similar sort of shift. So what is good design?
All of those things.
Well, different governments have tried to define or assist the process of delivering good design. You look at Sydney and SEP 65, which are design principles. You look at what the work Steve Woodland's done in the city of Perth and trying to set up the placemaking and the city parameters for good design at the moment. But if you bring that back to a BIM environment, BIM's not going to design you an aesthetic. And good design about, look at the award that happened last week, Perth Arena, and how much it got canned. And there is an element of Perth now that's saying that's good and exemplary design. There's other people that are calling it squash beer cans. So there's always going to be a divergence of opinion on good design. But I think for a start, the building's got to be right in its place and time, and it's got to be right in its environment, as well as all the performance type of things like sustainability that you're talking about. BIM can help us deliver better performing buildings, and I really see BIM and Revit and the tools that added on as a tester of good design rather than a deliverer of good design. It can test thermal performance, it can test shade and shadow, it can test any manner of things, materials. You can code the specification to it as far as material performance. So it's very easy to test things. Pull out the acoustics, show me all the acoustic wall, and in delivering that, you can see what it's missed. You can get clash detection, so you can bring better design in terms of testing your design, but you can't deliver design with BIM.
And I think that's a key point, because some people, I think I hear about intelligent models and I hear about the computers making decisions. And that worries me, because it's not the computer making decisions. The computer is just
It's only made the election easy.
Is BIM limited to certain project types or building scales? Because I know it's inhibited, I guess, practice sizes to outline that sort of thing. Like you see that there's a limit to where BIM is effective in.
I mean, we're a pretty small practice on this kind of panel. I think yes at the moment, but like anything, I suppose, like you look at solar panels, they actually pay themselves off now with their, lifespan and their cost and things. But I mean, Alex Bruce from Nicol is a great example when he was running around trying to do solar panels everywhere, and some guy in a pub said to him, what the hell are you doing this for? You realise how much energy goes into making one of those and how long it lasts for? There's no, you can't put these everywhere, but now that's totally reversed with, just the economies of scale. And so I think at the moment it's just, it's really difficult, but it's just, from what I can see anyway, and not really being full bottle on it all, I think, eventually and pretty soon it will be appropriate for, any scale of building. And I think that, we're only, I said to Khoa earlier, the only reason to do something is if it's going to make us sort of achieve better buildings. There's no point in doing it if we're not. And whether that's in speed or sophistication or, all those myriad of things that we've talked about, I think eventually, just to do a small house, you might be able to, with the intelligent modelling. But as far as just saying, I want a double brick wall or whatever it is, probably a really bad example in this context. But that it's just there, and you can probably assemble that and give enough information to the builder to build it very quickly, and and in these contractual times, as with enough information to wrap that up, say in a tender.
Sorry, I just wanted to respond to that, just to say that, what's worth health infrastructure, I think in New South Wales, they're the equivalent of the health department, they're sort of mandating it for buildings over 30 million. And we've certainly found with our experience that using it on these sort of, the less intensive buildings is perhaps the benefits aren't yet there. But those buildings that have propensity for a facility management option in the future definitely worth perhaps investment.
It's about appropriate, isn't it?
I think just in terms of come around quite a range of people from the Western Australian user group, and I've seen now from one person, architects, to 20,000, whatever, what's the top, a whole range, and my defining point, the people who used it found it useful for them, they go for it. And they make it work. And they make it work because they like it, they want to do it. And I think I couldn't see that it is too expensive even for a one-man show. Certainly there's several out there who just do it by themselves because they like it, they find use for it, and they find it useful. Of course, they may not do BIM because they're one-man show, but it still helps them in looking holistic at things. And I think it was also interesting, one of the panels from the TAFE, one of the lecturers said, one thing what they learned when they moved into BIM or a 3D world is the work of their students got better. It's just there's a certain amount of people who were always good in visualizing things in 3D, and some people who are not so good. The people who are not so good have now an aid, a help, as you mentioned, can test something. So they can test their design, they can test their 2D vision of something and say, oh, this looks ugly, I have to change that. And they may not have been able to test that before, they just didn't have that part in their brain working so well. So for them it's a great enabler.
Gentlemen at the back.
Yeah, back on the talking about building better buildings using BIM and creating better design. How are you guys finding using BIM with existing buildings, within existing spaces, and in particular with receiving a BIM model of existing structure and then working with that to actually create a better design with that increased understanding of what's already existing?
Does anyone?
Yeah, I mean we've encountered a couple of projects, particularly in North America, where I think there was a talk from Calvin Cam from the US GSA at a conference last year where he was talking about the GSA's portfolio, which is about 80-90% is existing conditions. They were diving really heavily into 3D laser scanning, and we've actually done a number of those now where, not on a greenfield site but on a constrained site, we have managed to get a far better understanding of what's going on in terms of design context far more rapidly than we would have traditionally, and with much greater accuracy. We're talking, people poking laser scanners up above ceilings to pick up existing services and that kind of stuff, and you just can't. There's no way that you could achieve the same result within the period that we managed to do it using traditional technology.
I was going to answer two questions at once. On terms of the scale of projects, we've done house alterations, $1 million worth of value, where it's not full BIM, but we've done full architecture, interiors and structures in a single model to do a complex house renovation. And one of the things about Revit that was a huge leap forward from, say, architectural desktop was the staging you could do in Revit. So it's quite a powerful tool in terms of a renovation environment or alterations environment, because you can capture the as-built model and then the changes you make, and you can filter it. So that, I think, is a real asset in that when you've got that kind of project. And at the other extreme of $1 million house renovation is the Perth station upgrade. So that was fully laser scanned to verify the model that we created from the as-built drawings, and we discovered huge discrepancies from the as-built drawings that were fundamental. So it's certainly, I agree, it holds a lot of benefits. It's still a time-consuming exercise to go through and understand those point cloud laser scans and to filter that information. It's not straightforward, it's not quick, but it does give you access where you simply can't get it. In the case of CityLink, it's a live working rail environment, so you simply can't get survey information where because the lines are open all the time. So with a laser scanner you can do it. So there's some real benefits there.
That point scan is amazing. That's
That's
amazing.
the best expertise in laser scans. We've been doing a few projects with architects recently who are actually asking for a full BIM deliverable so that they can then work with that to actually do the design for the structures.
A person that I know that works out of Malaysia, they've been doing that, and they've got a business based around that. And for massive housing development in a fully vegetated big valley, and they went through the whole sort of schematic design into design development based on hand surveys, and then a couple of things went wrong, and then they came in and found huge discrepancies in it as well, and they had to start again through all that work out. But picking up everything from different types of vegetation or different materials, and the way the laser reflects, and based on that data, it's just unbelievable what kind of information they can come up.
When you're having fun, time catches up with you. It's 8 minutes to go, 7 minutes to go. Move one more question.
On the scale of the projects, I find that the smaller the scale, the higher the scrutiny by the owner-occupiers, and the more likely you are to get owner-occupiers involved in the whole process. So I find it very good in terms of delivering good design outcomes, because you've got the flexibility there to offer alternative designs very quickly using 3D models.
Maybe one.
Just for the panel at the moment, do you see BIM as your master or your slave?
Good question.
At the moment, my
is there anything in between that?
Don't be.
You've got to keep on feeding it more money.
No, I'm just wondering, it's to me, what I'm seeing at the moment, that somebody's developed something, it's got some potential.
No, it's both.
And everybody's trying to see whether they can capitalise on that potential. And I'm just wondering what tomorrow holds. We talked about laser scanning. Is the technology going to revolutionise the whole market?
I think there's two important points, and one we haven't touched on at all in this discussion today. Certainly, as far as doing what we want to do, it allows us to do many of the things we've talked about already. And if we train our people correctly, it allows us to spin models around, looking at elevations we wouldn't have looked at, quickly assign, get the aesthetic right, and use it as a tool to analyse our design. On the other side of it, in running a practice, it adds another level of complexity, because we've always got to look at whether we've got standalone licenses or group licenses, and we constantly get emails going around if we've got 15 or 16 licenses, can someone shut down their Revit because we can't open ours? And it's looking at the add-ons, things we've looked at iCloud and Navisworks, and integrating with iConnect, and all the multitude of things that go to make up BIM. It's not just Revit or ArchiCAD or whatever, and then you've got to make a decision. Do we invest in that? Have we got the hardware and the screens to be able to run that properly? Where does our investment come again? How do we translate that into fees? So in terms of this thing, master and slave, yes, we are a slave to it, because once you adopt it in an office sense, you've got to run with it, and you've got to keep up with the technology. You've got to attract staff by saying, we've got this thing and you can learn to do this, so come and work with us because we're an employer of choice. There's lots of things other than just the design side that come in a practice side that are equally important in how you run your practice and how you bring it up to the point that you can use BIM in the first place, and you are a slave to that.
Great point.
I might be tempted to say that that's just part of being in any business in any industry at this point in time. It's not a BIM thing at all. That's just that's the way it is.
Technology.
Well, it started with
just
someone you mentioned that it's a business process, isn't it? That's great. I'm going to have to close. I'd like to first of all thank the panel members, and before we leave, a couple of words from each. Wisdoms, I don't know.
Yeah, look, I think that the takeaway for me for BIM and design is that it really adds certainty to a process which has been somewhat evolutionary ad hoc for a long period of time. I think that we've got the option to try some new things. We need to grab it and get on board.
It's difficult to put something together in such short notice. But I'd like to think that what we're trying to do is do what we've been doing, but doing it better. And BIM, I suppose, at the moment promises to deliver that. Whether it does mature to the extent that we need it to remains to be seen.
Yes, it is difficult.
So you used it already?
Yeah, I used it already. No, I suppose I'm wary of, and it's always what type of documentation do from pen to Revit, that the amount of documentation that you do to get the same building, because it is about the building, it's about what's there and how you run that building afterwards, now that BIM's in the fray. But I suppose having that distinction between, say, marketing image, it's photorealistic kind of renders, and that's just to sell something, but if you don't actually have to sell it, it's still going to, the same building, physical building is going to be there at the end, and that's what we're all here about. And I suppose, and then that drives on as far as what the educating clients and their expectations of how much information we're actually going to do to get that physical building there, because there's no point in doubling the amount of time, doubling the amount of information that we're putting in this non-building to get the same physical building.
Yeah, I think we're not going to go backwards, so we've got to go forwards. I think the key words out of all of this for me are collaboration and integration, and we've got to use the tools that we've got to produce better designs and be able to test them and to stay in business and use it efficiently and smarter.
From a design perspective, certainly the 25 years of my career, I've always worked in a 3D digital environment. It's just evolved and become more sophisticated, and I think coming back to what's good design, for me it's about a sustainable outcome with all the aspects we've talked about the amenity and the enjoyment of a space wrapped in its sustainability credentials, and that can be in terms of energy consumption, but it can be, was it built effectively, was it a cost-effective solution, did we get more value for money for our client, All of those things are part of this process, and I think it'll continue to evolve. And Michael's comment around the master builder, I think we are going back to, I see a role for the design, the architect as the design manager, taking preeminence from the project manager. The project manager is about program, and that's certainly something we've adopted as a practice. We tend to split those tasks, and the design manager is the generalist that understands a range of skills to a sufficient level to know that those people are on task, and the project manager is there just to drive program and deliverables. And I think we're going to see that come back, because I think it's a fundamental thing when you're talking and you're working in a BIM environment.
Thank you. Panel members, if you could put your hands together.